Hey everyone, let's talk SaaS architecture. If you're building a multi-tenant platform, you're probably spending, well, most of your time stressing about scaling your infrastructure. But I'll tell you right now, the biggest existential risk to your startup isn't a massive traffic spike. It's a catastrophic tenant data leak. Just imagine the absolute nightmare of a customer logging in and seeing a competitor's highly sensitive data. That literally destroys trust overnight. So today, we're unpacking the architecture you need to enforce centralized tenant isolation right from day one.
Because let's think about this. What actually happens when just one query forgets to include the tenant-ID filter? This is the traditional failure point for so many platforms out there. A lot of systems rely entirely on human memory. They expect developers to manually append a simple filter inside absolutely every single database query. And frankly, that works perfectly well, right up until the exact moment it doesn't. Because all it takes is one single query where a tired engineer simply forgets to add that where clause. Instantly, a routine data fetch turns into a massive cross-tenant leak. Relying on human perfection for critical data isolation is just a fundamental engineering flaw. Let's contrast that traditional, vulnerable approach with a truly robust architecture. The traditional setup relies on those manual filters, and dangerously, it trusts front-end tenant IDs, request headers, or client-provided workspace contexts. The problem? Those are easily spoofed. In a secure production-grade system, your architecture must explicitly never trust client-side inputs for identity. Instead, tenant identity has to come strictly from authenticated, server-issued JWTs. That server-side token becomes your absolute, indisputable single source of truth for who is making the request and which tenant they belong to.
Moving into part one, let's look at Prisma, middleware, and automated boundaries.
To actually remove that human error we just talked about, we have to automate enforcement at the data layer. In a flawless request lifecycle, we use Prisma middleware to enforce tenant isolation automatically. Take a look at this flow. Starting with a validated server JWT, the middleware intercepts the request and automatically injects the correct tenant filtering right into the operation. And this applies across the board, whether it's a standard find, an update, a delete, or even complex nested relations. Because this injection happens down at the middleware level, even if a developer completely forgets to add tenant filtering in their service logic, the query still remains safely isolated before it ever hits the database. It's a real game changer for your peace of mind.
And this setup brilliantly illustrates a core engineering philosophy you absolutely must adopt: fail closed. Cross-tenant access must be denied by default. If, for literally any reason, tenant resolution fails during a request, the system doesn't try to gracefully degrade or guess. It immediately blocks the request, denies access, and logs a critical security event. You must never write error handling that just catches an exception and returns true. Because as the saying goes, silent bypasses inevitably become data breaches.
Now, relying purely on a JWT's expiry time is actually pretty dangerous. Think about it. A token might be valid for an hour, but an employee could be fired in minute 5. That's exactly why every sensitive request must perform strict server-side revalidation. We aren't just trusting the token, we are checking active membership status, evaluating scoped permissions in real time, checking the revocation state, and validating the underlying health checks and system availability. This ensures that the user's current entitlements match exactly what they are attempting to do at that exact millisecond.
The crucial point here is the real-time consequence of that revalidation. If a member is removed from a tenant, their access dies immediately. There is no waiting around for a token grace period to expire. Their sessions become instantly invalid, and any cached permissions are evicted with zero downtime. This guarantees that your security posture accurately reflects the real-world administrative state of your customer's organization without any dangerous lag.
All right, let's move on to part 2, extending security to background workers. A truly holistic security model has to extend deeply into your event-driven background infrastructure. Async queues, cron jobs, and webhooks, they all must carry strict tenant context. Every background payload has to preserve the tenant ID as the isolation boundary, the actor ID for identity, the scope for permissions, and strict correlation IDs for request tracking. If you don't pass this context, your automated retry logic or async background jobs can inadvertently cross over and trigger cross-tenant data leaks. Multi-tenancy isn't just an API problem, it is a full system architecture concern.
Furthermore, this level of architecture demands highly detailed tenant-aware audit logs by design. Every single state-changing action must record the tenant, the actor, the specific resource, the timestamp, the IP address, and the exact specific change diff. This gives you the precise observability needed in a production environment.
If a customer reports an issue, suspicious activity is instantly traceable. And if a system error does occur, you have the exact historical state required to execute precise data rollbacks safely. So ultimately, the biggest lesson here is that multi-tenancy is not just going into your database saying, hey, let's add a tenant ID column everywhere and calling it a day. True SaaS scalability relies entirely on automated, system-wide boundaries. It requires fundamentally removing human error through enforced query boundaries, centralized authorization, strict revocation handling, deep worker isolation, and a relentless fail-close security posture. That is exactly how you scale a SaaS platform safely. These isolation patterns are absolutely critical for any serious production environment. All of the architectural decisions we covered today were built out and battle-tested while developing the platform you see on screen. Built while developing app.saasplatform.app. I highly recommend B2B builders check it out. Follow for the next architecture breakdown. Until then, ask yourself, is your SaaS actually isolating tenant data, or are you just one forgotten line of code away from a massive breach?